My wife cheated on me with her coworker while I was deployed, came back and saw her with him in our bed. Hey everyone, I need some serious advice, and I honestly don't even know where to start. My name is James, and I'm a 34-year-old guy who just got back from a year-long deployment overseas. My wife, Rebecca, and I have been married for 7 years. We have 2 kids, Lily, who's 5, and Mason, who's 3. I always thought we had a solid marriage. We weren't perfect, but we had a good life together, or so I thought. When I was deployed, Rebecca would often talk about how much she missed me and how she was struggling to manage everything at home. I thought she was holding up well, considering the circumstances, but now I realize there were cracks forming beneath the surface. There were a few subtle things that caught my attention. When I would video call, she started looking more dressed up than usual, even if she said she was just staying in with the kids. She'd be wearing makeup at odd hours and doing her hair like she was going out, even though she claimed she was only heading to the grocery store or the park. But I chalked it up to her trying to feel good about herself and didn't think much of it. I know that being alone at home with 2 young kids is a lot to handle, especially while your husband's halfway around the world. Now, looking back, I feel like a complete idiot. Let me know if this is the right kind of tone and structure for the story you're looking for. I can continue with the next parts if you'd like. So, here's where things start to unravel. After I got back home a few weeks ago, things felt off. Rebecca seemed more distant than I expected. At first, I figured it was just the adjustment period. We hadn't seen each other for a whole year, and we both needed time to get back into our routine as a family. But it was more than that. There was this weird tension between us that I couldn't quite put my finger on. One night, about a week after I got back, I noticed something strange. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when Rebecca's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen, just a reflex. The message was from someone named Emma, and it read, "Tonight was amazing. Can't wait until next time, winking-faced." I stared at that message for a long time, the pit of my stomach dropping like a rock. It didn't make sense. Rebecca hadn't gone out that night. She said she was meeting her friend, Michelle, for dinner and would be home by 9. And she was home by 9. I was sure of it. So why was Emma texting her like they just spent the evening together? When Rebecca came back into the living room, I tried to play it cool. I asked her casually, "Hey, how's Michelle doing? You guys have a good time catching up?" She looked a little startled and then smiled, one of those fake, tight-lipped smiles. "Oh, yeah. It was nice. Just a typical girls' night, you know." "Great," I said, nodding. But I couldn't help noticing that she didn't make eye contact when she said it. Something felt very wrong. That night, after Rebecca fell asleep, I found myself sitting in bed, staring at her phone on the nightstand. I knew what I was about to do was wrong. I'm not the kind of guy who invades someone's privacy. But the doubt had already taken root in my mind, and I couldn't shake it. I needed to know who Emma was and what she meant by "tonight was amazing." So, I picked up her phone, heart pounding in my chest, and entered her passcode. I knew it from years of being together, our anniversary date. The screen unlocked, and I hesitated for a second, almost hoping to find nothing suspicious. But when I opened her messages, I saw a conversation with Emma that made my blood run cold. Emma wasn't a woman. Emma was a contact saved under a fake name. The texts were from someone named Mark, one of her coworkers. The messages were graphic, full of flirtatious banter and explicit descriptions of what they'd done together that night. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It was as if the world had stopped spinning for a moment. I kept scrolling, numb with shock, until I reached messages that were weeks old, dating back to the very month I had been deployed. This wasn't a one-time thing. This had been going on for a long time. My hands shook as I put the phone back. I sat there in silence, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. Why had she done this? Why hadn't she told me she was unhappy? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? It felt like my entire life had been flipped upside down in a matter of seconds. I thought about waking her up right then and there, demanding answers, but something stopped me. I realized I needed more than just these texts before confronting her. I needed to understand how deep this betrayal went, and whether there was still something left to save, or if it was already too late. That's when I decided to dig a little deeper. The next few days were some of the hardest I've ever endured. I felt like I was living in a stranger's house, pretending everything was fine while my world was falling apart behind closed doors. I acted as normal as possible, playing with the kids, doing chores, and going through the motions of being a husband. But every time Rebecca looked at me, I could see the guilt lurking behind her eyes, and it just twisted the knife deeper. I knew I needed more proof before confronting her. The texts were bad enough, but I needed to know if this was really happening when I was home, right under my nose. So, I took a day off from work and set up a few small cameras around the house while Rebecca was out with the kids. I placed one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in our bedroom. I hated myself for doing it, but I felt like I had no other choice. A part of me still hoped I was wrong. Maybe the texts were just a stupid, disgusting fantasy that hadn't gone further than words. But deep down, I knew better. The first few days of footage didn't reveal much. Rebecca acted like her usual self, and there were no signs of anything suspicious. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind, thinking that maybe I'd jumped to conclusions too quickly. Then, on the fourth day, I saw it. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I had told Rebecca I'd be working late, but I actually left work early and parked down the street to keep an eye on the house. At 3:15, a black SUV pulled into our driveway. My stomach clenched as I watched a man step out, Mark, her coworker. I waited for a few minutes, hoping, praying that he was just dropping something off and would leave. But he didn't. He walked up to the front door, glanced around nervously, and Rebecca opened it for him, smiling like a teenager seeing her crush. I pulled out my phone and watched the live feed from the camera in our living room. They walked in, laughing and talking casually. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. They moved to the couch, where Rebecca leaned in and kissed him, full on, like she didn't have a care in the world. And then she led him upstairs to our bedroom. I sat in my car, frozen, watching them disappear from view as they entered our room. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind was screaming at me to do something, to storm into the house and throw that guy out of my home, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, helplessly staring at the screen. I forced myself to fast forward through the footage, feeling like I was dying a little more with each passing second. They spent nearly 2 hours together in our bed. The bed we'd bought together. The bed where we'd made our children. When they finally came back downstairs, Mark kissed her goodbye at the door, like he was some loving boyfriend who'd just dropped by to see his girlfriend. Rebecca watched him leave, a soft smile on her face, then casually went back to tidying up the house like nothing had happened. I didn't go inside that day. I drove to a park a few miles away and just sat there, staring blankly at the lake. It felt like I couldn't breathe, like there was a weight crushing my chest. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage had just been shattered. When I finally went home later that night, Rebecca greeted me with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, asking me how my day was. I tried to respond, but it felt like the words were getting stuck in my throat. I could barely look at her without seeing what had happened that afternoon flashing through my mind. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had all the evidence I needed. But how do you confront the person you love when you know it's going to destroy everything? I realized I wasn't ready to explode yet. I needed to understand more. Why was she doing this? Did she really want to be with him? Or was it something else? And most importantly, how long had she been lying to me? I decided that night that I needed to talk to Mark. If anyone could give me answers, it was him. I decided to go straight to the source. Mark worked just a few blocks away from where we lived. I knew it was risky, but I needed answers. I waited outside his office until he came out for lunch. When he saw me, his face went pale. He knew exactly who I was. "We need to talk," I said firmly, stepping in front of him. "James, he stammered, glancing around like he was looking for an escape. "Sit down," I said, pointing to a bench nearby. "I'm not here to cause a scene." He sat, eyes darting nervously. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "How long has it been going on?" Mark swallowed hard. 6 months. "Why her?" I asked, my voice tight. "She was lonely," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "We got close at work. It just happened." I clenched my fists, struggling to control my anger. "And you're in love with her?" Mark shook his head quickly. "No, it wasn't like that. She told me she'd never leave you. It was just something to get through the loneliness." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Rebecca had said she'd never leave me? Then why betray me at all? I took a deep breath, standing up. "I got what I needed," I said quietly. "Stay away from my family." Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked away, feeling a strange mix of anger and confusion. I knew what I had to do next: confront Rebecca. That evening, I went home determined to finally confront Rebecca. My mind was racing with everything Mark had told me, how she'd said she'd never leave me, that it was all just something to get through the loneliness. I needed to hear it from her own lips. When I walked in, Rebecca was in the kitchen making dinner. She glanced up, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey, you're home early. Everything okay?" I couldn't keep up the act any longer. "We need to talk," I said, my voice more serious than I intended. Rebecca's smile faded, and she looked at me cautiously. "Sure, what's going on?" I gestured for her to sit down at the dining table. She hesitated but finally set down the spatula and took a seat across from me. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I know what's been going on," I said slowly, watching her face carefully. Her eyes widened just slightly, but she tried to play it off. What are you talking about? Mark, I said bluntly. I know everything, Rebecca. I know you've been seeing him for the last 6 months. I know you've been lying to me. And I know you've brought him into our house. For a moment, she just stared at me, frozen. Then, as if a switch flipped, her expression changed to anger. Have you been spying on me? She snapped. I nodded. Yeah, I have. And I'm not sorry. I had to, because you wouldn't tell me the truth. Rebecca's jaw tightened, and I could see her struggling to decide what to say. It's not what you think, she finally muttered, looking down at her hands. Then explain it to me, I said sharply. Tell me what this really is, if not a betrayal of everything we built together. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I never wanted to leave you, she whispered. I love you, James. I really do. But when you were gone, I was so lonely. I felt like I was losing myself. Mark was just someone to talk to. Someone who made me feel seen. Seen? I repeated, incredulous. You've got 2 kids who see you every day. A husband who called and video chatted every chance he got, even from a war zone. And that wasn't enough? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. It's not an excuse, but I felt empty. I wasn't looking to fall in love or destroy our marriage. I needed something. Something to fill the void? I asked, my voice bitter. And now what, Rebecca? You've destroyed everything for what? A fling with your coworker? She looked at me desperately, reaching out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. James, please. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake, but I don't want to lose you. I stood up, shaking my head. You should have thought about that before you brought another man into our home. Into our bed. How do you expect me to just forget all of that? I don't, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I'm willing to do anything to make it right. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Her words hung in the air, but they felt empty. The damage was done. I'd heard enough for now, and the anger boiling inside of me made it impossible to think clearly. I need some time to process this, I said coldly, turning away. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. I don't want to see or hear from you until I'm ready to talk again. Without waiting for her response, I grabbed my keys and walked out. As I closed the door behind me, I heard her sobbing, but I kept walking. I knew this was far from over, but I needed distance. I needed space to figure out what came next, if there was even a future left for us. I stayed in a cheap motel that night, trying to make sense of everything. But no matter how much I thought it through, I felt lost. By morning, I knew I needed to go back, not for Rebecca, but for the kids. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. When I walked in, Rebecca was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like she hadn't slept at all. We exchanged a brief, awkward glance before I went upstairs to see Lily and Mason. They greeted me with sleepy smiles, and I spent the morning playing with them, pretending everything was normal. Once the kids were settled, I turned to Rebecca. We need to talk, I said quietly. She nodded, eyes red and puffy. Okay. We stepped out to the back porch. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my voice steady. I don't know if I can forgive you, Rebecca. You lied to me for months. You brought another man into our home. Why? Tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't because of you, James. You were always a good husband. I felt lost. And I made a horrible mistake. Lost? I echoed, shaking my head. That's it? That's your reason? I know it's not enough. I wish I could take it back. I'm so sorry. Silence fell between us. I looked at her, feeling both anger and sadness. The pain of thinking about ending our marriage hurt almost as much as staying. I don't know what's next, I finally said. I just need time. Rebecca nodded, tears falling silently. I'll give you whatever you need. With that, I turned and went back inside, feeling no closer to a decision than when I started. The next few days were a blur. I stayed in the house, but it felt like I was living in someone else's life. Rebecca and I barely spoke, only exchanging words when it came to the kids or mundane household tasks. The silence between us was thick, filled with all the things we weren't saying. I knew I couldn't keep it up forever, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at our family photos on the wall. I thought about how happy we used to be, how we built this life together, raising 2 beautiful kids. Was I really ready to throw it all away? Rebecca came in quietly and sat on the edge of the couch, not too close, but close enough that I could feel her presence. I didn't say anything, just waited, unsure of what she was going to say. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you, she started softly, her voice trembling. But I need to know, is there even a small chance we can work through this? For the kids, if not for us. The question hung in the air, and I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to say no, to get up and leave, to start fresh somewhere far away from this betrayal. But another part of me, the part that remembered the good times, the laughter, the love we shared before it all fell apart, hesitated. What does working through this even mean? I asked quietly. How do you see us coming back from something like this? Rebecca bit her lip, looking down at her hands. I don't know. Counseling? Therapy? Whatever it takes. I'm willing to do anything, James. I just don't want to lose our family. I let out a long breath, feeling exhaustion settle deep in my bones. You already did, Rebecca. Our family, it's not what it used to be. What you did changed everything. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, as if accepting that she'd already lost the most important thing to her. I know, she whispered. But I'm still going to try, even if you don't want to. I'll do whatever I can to be better, for the kids. Even if it's too late for us. Her words, as broken and desperate as they were, stirred something inside me. Maybe it was the sincerity in her voice or the love I still felt for the mother of my children. Or maybe it was the look on Lily and Mason's faces when I came back that morning, the way they lit up at the sight of their dad. Let's start with counseling, I said slowly, the words almost foreign on my tongue. For the kids. To figure out how we'll handle things if we don't work out. Rebecca looked up at me, a flicker of hope in her tear-filled eyes. Okay, she agreed softly. Thank you. I nodded, standing up and heading upstairs to my own separate room. It wasn't a decision to stay, but it wasn't a decision to leave either. It was just the first step in figuring out if there was any hope left, or if this was truly the end. The following week, Rebecca and I had our first counseling session. We agreed to meet with a therapist who specialized in couples dealing with infidelity. I didn't expect much to come of it, but I needed to know I had tried everything, for the kids, if nothing else. When we arrived, Rebecca looked tense and anxious, her hands twisting nervously in her lap as we waited in the therapist's small office. I tried to keep my distance, emotionally and physically, but seeing her like that still stirred something in me, a mix of pity and anger. James, Rebecca, thank you both for coming in today, the therapist, Dr. Collins, began when we were seated. I understand this is a difficult situation. My role here is to help guide the conversation, to give you a safe space to express your feelings and explore what's next, whether that's working through this or finding a path forward separately. I glanced at Rebecca, who looked down at her hands, tears already welling up in her eyes. I took a deep breath and nodded, not really sure what to expect. Dr. Collins turned to me first. James, would you like to start by sharing what you're feeling right now? I hesitated, the words struggling to form. I feel betrayed, I finally managed, my voice tight. Angry. Confused. I don't know if I can trust her again, or if I even want to try. Rebecca flinched at my words but didn't look up. I understand, she whispered. I've heard you more than I can put into words. I know I'm the one who's responsible for this, and I'm willing to take whatever comes. Dr. Collins nodded, looking between us. It's important to acknowledge those feelings. Rebecca, do you want to share why you think this happened? I've thought about that a lot, Rebecca said quietly, wiping at her eyes. I think I lost myself somewhere along the way. I felt alone and disconnected, and instead of reaching out to James, I sought comfort somewhere else. It was selfish and wrong, and I'm so sorry. I scoffed, unable to hold it back. Lost yourself? You weren't lost when you invited him into our home, into our bed. I know, she murmured, voice breaking. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness and try to be better. For the kids. For you, if there's even the smallest chance. Dr. Collins leaned forward. It's clear that there's a lot of pain here. But the fact that you're both willing to have this conversation shows that there's a desire for healing, in whatever form that takes. Trust can be rebuilt, but it's a long and difficult journey. The first step is honesty, even if it's painful. We spent the rest of the session talking about boundaries, communication, and what the next steps might look like. Every word felt like a struggle, but I realized something as we talked. I wasn't ready to give up. Not completely. There was still a part of me that wanted to see if there was anything left to salvage. When the session ended, Rebecca looked at me hesitantly. Thank you for giving this a chance, she whispered. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful. I nodded stiffly. Don't thank me yet. We have a long way to go. Leaving the office, I still didn't know if we could ever repair what was broken. But for the first time since I found out about the affair, I felt a tiny glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could try to rebuild, piece by shattered piece. After that first counseling session, things changed a little. Rebecca and I began talking more, but only about the kids and day-to-day stuff. I slept in the guest room, and we kept our distance emotionally. It was awkward, but at least it wasn't hostile. One evening, about a week after our session, Rebecca sat down across from me at the kitchen table after putting the kids to bed. "James," she said softly, "I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to be transparent with you. I've blocked Mark's number. I won't talk to him again, not even at work. I also gave my 2 weeks' notice at my job." I looked at her, surprised. "You quit?" She nodded. "I don't want anyone, to come between us again. It's a small step, but it's a start." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me still felt raw and uncertain. "Okay," I finally said. "Thank you for doing that." She smiled, a sad, tentative smile. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, James. I'm going to keep working on myself, even if you decide to leave." It was hard to hear, but I knew she meant it. I could see it in her eyes. The guilt, the pain, it was all there. I nodded slowly, not quite ready to forgive, but willing to see where things might go. For now, it was enough. Small steps, one day at a time. The small steps continued, and Rebecca kept her word. She quit her job, cut all ties with Mark, and began seeing a therapist on her own, outside of our joint counseling sessions. I noticed changes. She seemed more focused on the kids and even started doing things we hadn't done in years, like making breakfast together as a family or planning simple outings. One evening, after we put the kids to bed, she knocked softly on the door to the guest room. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked quietly. I nodded, motioning for her to come in. She sat down on the edge of the bed, looking nervous but determined. "I know I don't have the right to ask for this, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to go out with me sometime. Not as a couple, just as two people trying to reconnect." I blinked, caught off guard. "Like a date?" "No," she said quickly. "Not a date. Just, maybe coffee? Or a walk. I want to show you that I'm serious about changing. But only if you're comfortable." I thought about it for a moment. I hadn't expected her to ask something like that, but I also knew we couldn't keep living in limbo forever. We needed to see if there was anything left worth rebuilding. "Okay," I agreed slowly. "A walk, maybe. Somewhere quiet." Relief washed over her face, and she nodded. "Thank you, James. That's all I'm asking for right now, just a chance." We went for that walk the next day, and for the first time in months, we talked, really talked. Not about the affair, or the pain, but just about life, the kids, and things we'd forgotten to share over the years. It was just one walk, but it felt like a turning point. Maybe there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like I could see a glimmer of the woman I'd fallen in love with years ago. And for now, that small spark was enough to keep moving forward. The walks became a regular thing. Every few days, after dinner, Rebecca and I would go out and just talk. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the old anger and bitterness bubbled up inside me, but I tried to push it down and focus on the present. One evening, during one of these walks, Rebecca stopped and looked at me with a serious expression. "James, there's something I want to give you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I've reset all my passwords. My phone, email, social media accounts, everything. I want you to have them. You can check whenever you want." I stared at the phone, surprised. "You're giving me your passwords?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I want you to know I have nothing to hide. I'm not asking for you to trust me yet. I know I have to earn that, but I want to be completely open with you. No more secrets." I hesitated, staring at the phone in her outstretched hand. It felt like a big step, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to take it. "I don't know if this will make me feel better," I admitted. "I understand," she said softly, not pulling her hand back. "But I want you to have the option. To know that you can check if you need to." Slowly, I took the phone from her hand. "I appreciate it," I murmured, unsure of what else to say. We finished the walk in silence, but something felt different. I didn't even open her phone that night. It sat untouched on the dresser, the screen dark. It wasn't that I suddenly trusted her, it was more that I felt like she was genuinely trying, that she was committed to showing me she was serious about changing. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Rebecca kept making those efforts. Small things, like keeping her phone face up and never putting it on do not disturb mode anymore. She'd also started asking me to join her in her therapy sessions, so I could hear firsthand what she was working on. I didn't fully trust her, and I knew it would be a long time before I could. But these small gestures, offering transparency, inviting me into her healing process, they mattered. They showed that she understood the magnitude of what she'd done and was willing to put in the effort to prove she was different now. Trust didn't come back in one big leap. It was tiny steps, one after the other. And, for the first time since the affair, I found myself wanting to take those steps, cautiously, slowly, but moving forward nonetheless. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us after all. Just when I thought things were finally starting to get a little better, something happened that shook the fragile progress we'd made. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the kids were at a friend's house for a playdate. Rebecca and I were organizing the garage, one of those simple, mindless tasks that didn't require us to talk much. Out of nowhere, Rebecca's phone buzzed on the workbench. I glanced at it, my old instincts flaring up. I tried to ignore it, but then I noticed the name on the screen. It was Mark. The notification was just a short message, "Hey, can we talk? It's important." My heart pounded. I felt a surge of anger, hurt, and betrayal all over again. "What the hell is this, Rebecca?" I asked, holding up her phone. Rebecca's face drained of color as she saw the message. "James, I don't know why he's texting me," she stammered. "I haven't spoken to him since I quit my job. I blocked him on everything. I swear." "Then why is he reaching out now?" I demanded, my voice rising. "If you blocked him, how is he still contacting you?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head frantically. "Maybe it's from a new number?" "I swear, I haven't talked to him." I felt myself spiraling back into that dark place, the one I thought I was finally starting to crawl out of. All the doubts and anger rushed back. "Show me your phone," I demanded, shoving it into her hands. She didn't hesitate. Rebecca unlocked her phone and handed it to me, her hands trembling. "Go through it. Check everything. There's nothing there, I promise." I scrolled through her messages, her emails, her call history. Nothing from Mark. No contact. No recent messages. It looked clean. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played all over again. "Why now, Rebecca?" I asked, frustration and hurt boiling over. "Why would he text you now, after all this time?" "I have no idea," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I'll block this number, too. I'll do anything, James, just, please, don't let this ruin everything we've been working toward." I turned away, unable to look at her. I knew she might be telling the truth, maybe he did find a new way to contact her. But the timing of it all felt like a cruel joke. Just when I was beginning to feel a sliver of hope, the past came crashing back. "I need some space," I said quietly. "I need to think." Rebecca nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand. Take all the time you need." I grabbed my keys and left the house, driving aimlessly around town. The anger slowly began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I was so tired of feeling like this, tired of doubting, tired of second-guessing, tired of this constant battle between wanting to forgive and fearing more betrayal. I pulled over at a park and just sat there, staring blankly out the window. If this was going to be my life, constantly looking over my shoulder, then maybe it was better to walk away. But as I thought about the kids, the family we'd built, I knew it wasn't that simple. I had a choice to make. Either find a way to push through this setback, or finally accept that some wounds never really heal. For now, I wasn't sure which path I'd choose. All I knew was that this fight wasn't over yet. The next morning, I woke up still feeling drained. My mind replayed the moment I saw that text over and over. I knew I couldn't keep running from it. I needed answers, and not just from Rebecca. "Give me Mark's number," I told her bluntly over breakfast. She froze, a piece of toast halfway to her mouth. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "I need to talk to him," I replied firmly. "I need to understand why he's still trying to reach out to you. I need to know if there's something else I don't know about." She hesitated but then slowly nodded. "Okay," she whispered, jotting down the number. I get it." I took a deep breath and stepped outside, dialing the number with shaking hands. After a few rings, he picked up. "Hello? It's James," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. "Rebecca's husband." There was a pause on the other end. "James, I didn't expect you to call. Why are you reaching out to her?" I asked sharply. "I thought this was over." "It is over," he said quickly. "I swear, I haven't spoken to her since she left the job. I only texted because I found something of hers at the office when I was cleaning out some drawers. I didn't want to just throw it away." I frowned, confused. "What did you find?" "It's a bracelet," he admitted. "It looked sentimental. One of those engraved ones. It has her name on it and forever written underneath." I clenched my jaw, a mix of emotions flooding me. I remembered that bracelet. I'd given it to Rebecca for our 5th anniversary. I had no idea she kept it at work. "I'm not trying to start anything, James," Mark continued. "I just wanted to make sure it got back to her." "Why now?" I demanded, still suspicious. "Why didn't you return it sooner?" He sighed. "Because I didn't want to make things worse. I was hoping you two were moving on. But when I found it, I figured it was something she might want back, even if I was the last person she wanted to hear from." There was a sincerity in his voice that threw me off. I didn't want to believe anything that came out of his mouth, but his explanation made sense. I took a deep breath, trying to decide what to say next. Just leave it at the front desk of your office, I finally replied. I'll pick it up myself. Okay, he agreed quietly. I'm really sorry for everything, James. I never should have gotten involved. I know I messed up. I hung up without another word, staring at the phone in my hand. There were no more accusations left to make, no more anger to vent. Just a dull ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. When I went back inside, Rebecca looked at me with wide, worried eyes. What did he say? He found your bracelet at the office, I said simply. I'm going to pick it up later. Her face crumpled, and she nodded slowly. I didn't even realize I left it there. I'm sorry. Stop saying sorry, I muttered, rubbing my forehead. Just, let's deal with this. I left to get the bracelet that afternoon. When I got to the office, the receptionist handed it to me without a word. I looked down at the small piece of jewelry in my palm, a reminder of happier times that now felt distant and almost foreign. Back home, I placed the bracelet on the kitchen counter in front of Rebecca. Here, I said softly. It's yours. Do what you want with it. She picked it up gently, tears filling her eyes. Thank you, for not giving up on me. I didn't respond. I just turned away, unsure of what to feel anymore. Every step forward seemed to be met with another reminder of what was broken. But seeing her hold that bracelet like it was a lifeline, I realized that maybe it wasn't just about what she did or didn't do. It was about what we were both willing to rebuild. I'm not giving up, I finally whispered, almost to myself. But I'm not forgiving either. Not yet. And that was enough for now. The struggle continued, but at least we were still in it, together, however fragile that togetherness was. After the bracelet incident, Rebecca seemed even more committed to making things right. She asked me to join her therapy sessions, and I reluctantly agreed. I figured it couldn't hurt to see what she was working on and to maybe gain a better understanding of how she ended up in that dark place. It was hard, though, sitting there, listening to her talk about feeling lost, unfulfilled, and everything else that led to the affair. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult session, Rebecca suggested something unexpected. James, I know we've been doing these joint sessions, but maybe you should see someone on your own too. I frowned, taken aback. Me? Why? Because this has affected you just as much as it has me, she said gently. You're holding so much anger and pain, and you deserve a place to talk about it without worrying about me. I opened my mouth to argue, but then I stopped. She was right. I had been carrying all these emotions, bottling them up, and only letting them spill out in moments of confrontation or bitterness. Maybe talking to someone would help, even if I didn't want to admit it. All right, I said slowly. I'll think about it. The next week, I found myself sitting in front of a therapist, someone I'd never met before, feeling more vulnerable than I ever had. It took a while for me to start talking, but when I did, it was like a floodgate opened. I talked about the betrayal, the constant doubt, and how I felt torn between holding on and letting go. It feels like I'm in this constant battle, I confessed. One part of me wants to walk away and start over, and the other part wants to fight for the family we've built. The therapist nodded thoughtfully. It's normal to feel conflicted. You're mourning the loss of the relationship you thought you had, while also trying to decide if you can build something new with the person who hurt you. That hit me hard. I had been so focused on Rebecca's actions and the affair that I hadn't allowed myself to fully process my own grief, the loss of trust, of certainty, of the version of our marriage that I'd believed was real. I started seeing the therapist weekly, and for the first time, I began focusing on my own healing, separate from Rebecca's. It was freeing, in a way. I could talk openly about my anger, my fears, and my confusion without feeling like I had to protect anyone else's feelings. One evening, after a session, I came home and found Rebecca waiting for me on the back porch. She looked up as I walked over, a tentative smile on her face. "How was your session?" she asked softly. "Good," I said simply, sitting down next to her. "Hard, but good." She nodded, and we sat in silence for a while, just looking out at the yard. For once, the silence wasn't heavy or awkward. It was just peaceful. "I'm really proud of you," Rebecca whispered, breaking the quiet. "I know this is all so hard, but I see you trying, and it means everything to me." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just let her words sink in. "I'm not doing it for you," I said finally. "I'm doing it for me. For the kids." "I know," she murmured. "But it still matters." As we sat there, I realized something. We were no longer just fighting for our marriage, we were fighting for ourselves, too. For who we were as individuals, and who we wanted to be moving forward. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about seeing if we could rebuild something entirely new from the pieces. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that might just be possible. Months passed, and though we were still far from where we wanted to be, things slowly began to feel more stable. There were good days and bad days, times when we laughed together with the kids, and times when I'd wake up in the middle of the night, still haunted by the betrayal. But through it all, we kept showing up for each other, step by step. One evening, after the kids were in bed, Rebecca and I sat on the porch, sipping tea in comfortable silence. Out of nowhere, she reached over and placed her hand gently on mine. I stiffened at first but didn't pull away. "James," she began softly, "I just want you to know how grateful I am that you've stuck with this. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know I still have a lot of work to do. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." I looked down at her hand resting on mine, feeling the warmth of her touch and the sincerity in her words. I hadn't realized until that moment just how far we'd come. There was still pain, still lingering resentment, but there was also something else, a small, fragile seed of hope. "Neither am I," I replied quietly, squeezing her hand gently. "We've been through hell, but we're still here." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I want to keep moving forward, James. Even if it's slow, even if it takes a lifetime. I just want us to keep trying." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of peace and determination. "We will. But let's not forget, we need to keep working on ourselves, too. This is about more than just us. We both need to be the best versions of ourselves, for each other and for the kids." Rebecca's eyes shone with unshed tears, but this time they were different, full of hope instead of pain. "I promise," she whispered. "I'm committed to that. To being better, for all of us." We sat there for a long time, hand in hand, as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. It wasn't a grand declaration of forgiveness or some dramatic reconciliation. It was just two people, slowly piecing themselves back together. Our journey wasn't over, and there would still be challenges ahead. But for now, I knew one thing for certain: we were both willing to keep moving forward, no matter how long it took. And that was enough. We weren't just rebuilding our marriage, we were rebuilding ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that would lead us to a place even stronger than where we started.